Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg, the publisher of Orbis Books. I'm very happy to be joined here today by a new Orbis author, Jordan Denari Duffner, who is the author of this book that'll be released shortly, Islamophobia, What Christians Should Know and Do About Anti-Muslim Discrimination. Jordan is a doctoral student in religion and theology at Georgetown University, and she has written a previous book with Liturgical Press called Finding Jesus Among Muslims, How Loving Islam Makes Me a Better Catholic. Now, Islamophobia is obviously not a new phenomenon, but it's a term that's relatively new. How did that come about, and could you say a little bit about what that problem is and why you decided to write about this?
Absolutely. And thanks so much again for having me and for supporting this book. It really means a lot to be publishing it with Orbis. Islamophobia is our term for anti-Muslim prejudice and discrimination. And as you said, the word is kind of new in our public discourse. It's something that not many people, I think, heard about before maybe 2015, 2016. But this problem of prejudice and discrimination towards Muslims has been a long-standing one. I think many of us can remember back to the aftermath of the September 11th attacks as a time when Muslims were increasingly targeted both in hate crimes and through government actions. But the problem also precedes that as well. And in the book, I talk about all the different facets of Islamophobia, and then also what I think we Christians can and should do about that.
The book includes an amazing catalog of stories of incidents and examples of anti-Muslim prejudice. And as I was reading it, I thought, yeah, I remember all these things. They were all familiar to me. It really struck me, though, how it all added up to this pervasive kind of atmosphere of prejudice. So that Islam is identified, Islam equals terrorism, that kind of fear that it represents this hostile culture that is invading our country, and we have to be protected from it, and how that is in television, and it's in cartoons, and it's everywhere around us. And that really struck me and shocked me of how much that has kind of entered into the bloodstream of our culture.
And that's one of the things that I was trying to draw attention to. I think, unfortunately, for so many of us, particularly people who are Christian, who grew up here in the United States, so many of these negative stereotypes that we have about Muslims have become like common knowledge almost, or they're things that we take for granted. They're things that we don't question, even though they're not true, and they don't. These stereotypical ways of thinking about Muslims don't actually represent who Muslims are. And unfortunately, these notions that about Muslims, that they're inherently violent or oppressive, things like that, they lead to harmful actions. They lead to harmful policies. And I tried to really draw attention in the book to the impact that this has on Muslim individuals and families and communities, because, as you said, we hear politicians, for example, make anti-Muslim comments. Maybe we'll see a news story about a hate crime that happened in our community, but we don't, especially if we don't know Muslims personally, we don't quite grasp the impact that can have on a community. And so I tried to draw attention to that in the book too.
Well, of course, when there is a hate crime against any group, it's not just that individual who's the victim of that. But it is really directed at an entire community. And I was interested in how you talked about the kind of racializing of anti-Muslim attitudes. And could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so, Islamophobia is obviously a form of prejudice and discrimination that targets Muslims, but it also ends up impacting lots of other communities as well. A lot of times the way this is spoken about is other people being mistaken for Muslim because of the way that they look. So those who practice the Sikh faith, for example, are often targeted in hate crimes that were potentially intended for Muslims. I also offer some stories in the book about Arab Christians who have been at the receiving end of anti-Muslim violence. Another way that I talk about this racialization of Islam as it pertains to this problem of discrimination is that these stereotypes that we have about Muslims, we view them as sort of inherent to the community, that all Muslims are a monolith that are defined by these certain qualities that that if they don't prove to us that they are not violent or oppressive or backward, that they are inherently that way. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to unpack and help readers to grapple with, and then to also push back against too.
Well, there's this kind of sense also, that Muslims are inherently un-American, and of course, that kind of attitude was also in earlier times addressed to Jews, to Catholics, to people from Asia, Africa, etc. Could you say a little bit about how you got into this and what inspired you on this path?
Yeah, so it was two different things, really. One was my experiences of friendship and dialogue with Muslims, just getting to know Muslims as friends in high school and in college, and having this experience of interreligious dialogue with them from my point of view as a Catholic, and from having grown up Catholic and being exposed to this new religious tradition and this new community of people that I didn't grow up knowing much about, and having a really positive experience of Muslims, and realizing that the way that Muslims are portrayed in our media and in our and in politics oftentimes doesn't match the community that I had gotten to know. Mm-hmm. Another part too is recognizing that in our Christian community, and in particular in the Catholic community that I grew up in, that there was this problem of fear of Muslims, of prejudicial attitudes being tolerated and even promoted sometimes by our communities and by our leaders. And so a lot of my work over the last number of years has been trying to help our broadly Christian faith community to unlearn some of that, and to also push back against this Islamophobia using our faith, because even though our faith is sometimes used to justify discrimination, I don't think it has to be that way. And I think we actually have so many resources and positive aspects of our tradition that we can draw on in crafting a positive response to Islamophobia.
Yeah, so this is an unusual book, I guess, on the subject, because it really is addressed to the Christian community. Mm-hmm. What are you hoping to achieve there, or what would you like people to really take away from this?
So in the sort of second half of the book, I focused specifically on the way that Christians have contributed to Islamophobia, mm-hmm. Both as individuals and sort of as a collective. So I look at some contemporary cases where Christian leaders or media personalities and things like that have furthered anti-Muslim bigotry, or even in some cases where Christians have advocated for violence against Muslims or have engaged in violence against Muslims. And I also look at some historical examples as well. And I do that because I think it's not something that many of us are familiar with. We don't know that history, and we also sometimes don't want to look at these, less than savory, to say the least, examples of how our own community has behaved towards people of another faith. But then the final portion of the book is looking at all of these different examples from the Christian tradition, and looking at examples of other Christians who are really leading the way, I think, in combating Islamophobia. I think one thing that a lot of readers of Orbis books might find interesting in that portion is the way I draw on Catholic social teaching. A lot of times when we talk about interreligious relations, it's often framed through this framework of dialogue and encounter and that sort of thing. But one of the things that I really wanted to do is to look at Catholic social teaching and say, okay, we have these principles about human dignity and protecting life, about solidarity and subsidiarity and preferential option for the poor, and look at Islamophobia through these lenses, not only to kind of diagnose Islamophobia as a problem, but also to think about solutions through that lens too.
What are some of those solutions?
I think there's, I talk about a lot of them in the book, but I think an important thing that we have to do as individuals is first look inward and do some almost like kind of an examine of conscience, thinking about, how do I view Muslims? What stereotypes or misgivings do I have? And not shaming ourselves over that. I talk a lot in the book about my own journey to overcome some of these biases, and I have very graciously some other people in my life allowed me to share some of their stories overcoming their own biases as well. So I think that's a really important first step. I also think we have to call out Islamophobia when Islamophobic sentiments are voiced in our Christian communities, and that doesn't have to always be done in a really public way. But I think it's important that, especially with our leaders, we hold them accountable, and that we do that in whatever way we can. There's so many other examples I can mention related to political advocacy on behalf of Muslims, and then also just living out what the church calls the dialogue of life, which is just this relationship of friendship and hospitality and solidarity that we have with people of other faiths. And I think from that kind of relationship, a lot of good fruits can come forth, and that those relationships, I think, are a foundation for all of our communities to really support one another when different injustices confront our communities.
I was thinking back on, when, during the Obama's first campaign, and somebody said, "I don't trust him. He's an Arab, or he's Muslim." And John McCain says, "No, no, no, ma'am. He's actually a good family man." And Colin Powell made an interesting response to that, kind of attacking the premise of it. What if he was a Muslim? Or is the suggestion that a Muslim can't be a good family man or good American? And on the point you were just making, there was a quote at the end of the book that I had not seen before, that was taken from a tweet that somebody made, I guess in the context of Black Lives Matter. That you applied to this, saying that maybe you could help me, being anti-racist doesn't mean that you have no racism, but that you were committed to opposing racism wherever you find it, including in yourself.
Yeah.
So implying that there is a journey there as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a journey. And that's what I'm trying to really invite people on through this book, to give them a window or a glimpse into what Muslims have experienced in these different manifestations of the problem, and then to hopefully give them some concrete suggestions for what we can do going forward. And another thing that I wanted to say too is that I think what I'm trying to drive home in this book is that Islamophobia hurts Muslims first and foremost. It's something that hurts Muslim individuals and communities. But it also is something that hurts us as Christians. When any group is on the receiving end of injustice or discrimination, that's something that we, I think, should be naturally inclined to care about and to work to upend, like with so many other social or environmental issues. Even if it's not something that impacts us directly, we have a responsibility to do what we can to alleviate it. But I also, one of the things that I just felt so much when I was writing this book is that when we allow this negative sentiment to persist in our communities, it really kind of, it hurts us as well. And we aren't really living up to the values that we say that we have as Christians. We're not living up to, I think, the vision that God has for the human family when we're setting up these barriers between us and them. And so I hope that message also comes across in the book, that, we have, I think, a God-given responsibility and calling. I mean, it's a positive calling to say, okay, we can do something about this. We can build a world that is less discriminatory, is less bigoted than the one that we live in now.
Mhm. Well, I hope so. And
I hope so too.
thank you very much for joining me today. And I really recommend this book very highly, Islamophobia.
Thank you.
It is it's very readable. It is disturbing in a lot of ways, but it's also inspiring. And thank you on your ongoing journey and mission to spread this word. So thank you very much, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Robert.